You all are in for such a treat today, so prepare yourself. In this video, we're talking to Madeleine de Hauke. Madeleine recently had a TED Talk that was called Stop Blushing and Speak Up to Unlock Your Potential. This video essentially tells about how she cured her blushing with a simple trick that she learned in medical school. You can watch the TED Talk. I'll have it linked in the description box below. But in this video, I wanted to dive deeper into some of the things that she talked about in the TED Talk video and ask her a little more personal questions about how she cured her blushing. Madeleine is the CEO of Business for Good. She helps companies, leaders, future leaders reach their highest potential through a holistic combination of professional development and personal growth. She earned her medical degree from Imperial College London, and she worked in the life sciences industry for over 2 decades. She founded Business for Good in 2018, offering a unique mix of powerful assessments, neuroscience, cognitive science, and team dynamics. And she helps leaders unlock their superpower to disrupt business as usual and accelerate innovation, agility, and impact. Madeleine is a certified neuroscience of change practitioner, accredited executive and life coach, collective intelligence facilitator, and Colby certified coach. Prepare to be encouraged. Prepare to have your mind blown. Hey everybody, this is editing April right now. I wanted to give you a heads up about this video. I did not realize when I recorded it that I had my self view off. So what that means is that it never actually shows me on the video. It only shows Madeleine, which is great. I'm glad it captured her. She's the star of the show. But just wanted to give you a heads up that there is no actual video of me because I had that hidden, and apparently it records that way, and I didn't even think about that. So anyway, enjoy the video. I'm going to try to make it as visually pleasing as possible, but the best part is that you get to hear from Madeleine, and she has so many great things to say, so enjoy. I don't even know why. Every once in a while, we'll go through YouTube and just look up erythrophobia and see if anybody has said anything about it. And I was laying in bed one morning and your TED Talk came up, and I was like, are you kidding me? I think this is incredible. And so, yeah, I wanted to reach out to you. I reach out to people sometimes, and you're never going to hear anything back. And so when I got your response, I was like, this is a huge moment, I think, just for the community to have the opportunity for me to talk to you and to share it with them.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure, April. Thank you so much for reaching out. And I'm so glad that the TEDx talk found you. And it's one of those things, at least for me, blushing was something I tried to hide.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter is a stutterer, and you talk to her teachers, they don't know she stutters. And I think blushing for me was the same. You get so good at developing strategies to hide it and avoid it, that often people don't know about it, and you cover it up and so on, and you find strategies. But so it affects so many people, but maybe they don't like to admit it to others because we see it as a hindrance to our progression, don't we?
Yeah, I think that was the thing for me. I started Blushing Phoenix 3 years ago, and it was because I was a corporate executive. I had worked my way up the ladder, and I'll ask you some questions around this in a second. But a lot of people have already gone and listened to the TED Talk to be prepared for our interview and for this conversation. But a lot of that is that I always saw myself in a leadership position, and I loved being able to navigate corporate America and go through that process. And it wasn't until I got elevated into a higher position with a boss, an authority figure, that could be a little crude and rude and judgy. And one day I was talking to him, and he looked at my chest, and he said, like in my neck, he said, "Did I just make you really upset?" And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because you're super flushed right now, and you're like splotchy." And I looked down, and I was completely like in hives almost. And I remember that moment, similar to your story of being in the classroom where all the faces turned and looked at you. And it just created this cycle at that moment. Every time I saw him, every time I was in a conversation too long with people, I would start getting hot. And then, I had a couple of people say like, "Oh, are you okay?" Because mine looks like allergic reaction. So they're like, "Are you okay?" They're truly concerned about my health and well-being, but it just would make me fold into myself. And I still was able to navigate through the ranks of corporate America, but it was really by just like show up and do it, show up and do it, show up and do it. And one day I just felt like I was imploding on the inside. And there's like a whole story about how I went to the dentist and they were doing a root canal and I was on like the gas and I started flushing while I was on the gas and they thought I was having an allergic reaction. And I was kind of, a little paralyzed at that moment because you're in the gas. And I just remember sitting there internally talking to myself inside of my body and saying, I am so sorry. Whatever I've done to hide you, whatever's happened, whatever I have forsaken in you, I'm going to go and release whatever that is. So it's been a 3-year journey of just kind of showing up on camera and talking about it. And it turned into people just showing up. I mean, I don't know how to market anything. People just started showing up to this channel and leaving comments and saying, "Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one." And it's a very private suffering.
That's right.
Very private. So in your TED Talk, you talk about speaking up to unlock your potential. And I find that so fascinating because it's really right where I'm at in my journey right now. What I've been talking about a lot on the channel recently about taking up space and just showing up and using my voice. And I realized for me, I'm an extrovert, I'm vocal, but one thing I realized is that I talk a lot, tell a lot of stories and can really connect with people, but I don't always say what I actually wanted to say. And so you share about your first blushing experience in the TED Talk, and you give us kind of an overview of how that started for you. But for people who haven't seen that video, do you mind just take a moment and tell us about that first experience and what happened in your body at that moment?
Sure. And just before I do, I'm in my 50s and I've been blushing since I was 7. Mm-hmm. And it's only now that I'm daring to tell that story.
Wow.
Nearly 40 years later. Wow. So, and like you said, it's a very personal thing, and it is personal, very intimate indeed. And the story you told, how it came for you, it was a male figure and it was on your chest. It's kind of related to sexuality in some way. There's so much there. It's so much more than just embarrassment or whatever. There's a great deal there, but I believe it's always related in some way to trauma. So I'm going to tell my story. My story, well, for me, it's very traumatic. Mm-hmm. But what I want to say before I tell the story is that it doesn't have to be a traumatic event. It's something that your body registers as a traumatic event, no matter what the scale of trauma is. So it might be a disastrous trauma or a mild trauma, but if your body registers it as a trauma, it remembers it. And any time that is threatened to be triggered, your body recognizes it and up goes the response. Mm-hmm. So I just want to say that to people because they might think, well, why am I blushing over such an unimportant thing? That it is important. It was important to your body at the time because it triggered something to you at the time. Like you were saying, there was masculinity, there was perhaps overbearingness. It was that made you, it kicked in your flight response, and that's what created the reaction. So trauma is different for everybody, but it's still a traumatic event, no matter what the trigger was.
Right.
And of course, we don't always find the trigger. So mine was, it's the first time I remember it, but I know that in my family, we all suffer from blushing. So we all suffer from it. It might be because we've got highly reactive sympathetic systems, but all the siblings suffer from it. There's 4 of us. So mine goes back, like I said, so I was 7, and it was a normal day because I was at school, and yet it wasn't a normal day. If you've seen the TED Talk, you know why. But we were trying to create a sense of normality. And so being at the back of the class was a safe place for me. And safety is really important in all this, because I'm at the back, I'm not being noticed. I'm very, very tall. So it was really nice for me to be at the back because I could hide. And then suddenly my teacher tells the class what's happened. And the class, everybody in the class, and I'm at the back, they just turn around and stare at me. And they're not saying anything. And they got this strange smile on their face. And my teacher's looking at me, and I'm just standing there. And I don't know, well, I'm sitting there. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I smile, because what else do you do? And then I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm smiling. And this terrible thing's just happened. I'm awful. I'm smiling. And then I'm feeling ashamed and guilty all at the same time. And then this massive blush just comes over me. And that for me was the trigger event. So my body imprinted that terrible moment, and remembered and recognized that moment any time I might be looked at or be the center of attention. And I think it's that we have to remember. It's that trigger. And the cure lies in knowing what the trigger is, knowing what your trigger is, because you can begin to short circuit it. So, of course, what I did for far too many decades is avoid the trigger by avoiding meetings or avoiding being noticed. I tried to make myself smaller. I put on baggy clothes. I did anything I could to disappear, even refraining from answering questions when I knew the answer, or refraining from applying to universities if there was an interview. And I know people still do that. I know it holds people back because they refrain from doing something because they're too worried they're going to be judged because they blush. Mm-hmm. And that's why I say, speak up to unlock your potential, speak up to choose self-actualization, whatever that is for you, because it's only by going through this that we can get to the other side and we can cure it. And we can cure it. I still blush, especially now. I'm midlife, so now I've got menopause. Adding to it was such a hassle. I thought I was over it, and now it's started again. But we can navigate these things, and having created a community, I think, is such an important thing, April. So I'm so honoured to be invited to this, because we think we're alone, and we're not.
Yeah.
So by creating this community, I'm sure you help so many people. So it's such an important thing to do.
Yeah. And thank you for that. And I think that's the big thing. What I tell people is I still flush, but I have beat erythrophobia. I am not afraid of that the fear that I had, the phobia that I had is no longer there. And, there are still times because I'm a chest and neck flusher. I mean, and all my wardrobe is high neck because that's how I hit it all the time. But I notice now in the company I work for now, I wear t-shirts all the time. And it's one of those, it's virtual, but I've started to feel more safe. And I know that you talk about that in your TED Talk as well, about environment. And yes. I've come from between the first initial flushing experience that I had. I remember if I would get really upset or angry or really passionate about something, having a flush on my chest. Okay. But it was easy to go, this correlates with this. And so that's a normal thing. We move on. It was when it would become, you're standing there having a great conversation with somebody and you feel safe. And then all of a sudden they're like, are you okay? Is everything okay? And then it's what happens in the mind. You talk about the voice in your head telling you not to speak up, and that same voice telling you to be small, don't be seen, and that people will judge you and you're going to look stupid. And I found it so interesting, the similarities between using your voice and being seen, and how blushing or flushing or turning red, or people who deal with rosacea or hyperhidrosis, the extreme sweating, all of these same sympathetic nervous system responses, and what your mind is going to tell you that continue to push you back that direction into playing small. You talked about, actually, I wanted to ask you first, did you try any remedies or therapies to try to stop your blushing or your fear of turning red when you were first starting to navigate how that was making you feel, and you wanted to make a change with it?
I literally, so as I said, I literally just avoided any potentially difficult situations. And I regret that. Because I missed on opportunities. I downplayed, like I said in my TED talk, I became an observer in my life, not a player. So no, I really self-cured myself. I didn't try anything from outside. I really just self-cured over time.
What was your moment of like, I'm tired of observing, I'm tired of playing small? What was that like for you in that process?
Well, the trigger for me, the major event for me was, so I had this avoidance strategy, which was working really well, but, you know, keeping me very small. And I wanted to be a doctor. And so I was in medical school. And it was in my third year of medical school, and I had to do this group project, which was a real challenge for me because it meant presenting in front of a group. And the thing is that group project, if it didn't go well, not only did the group fail the whole year, but I included in the group would fail the whole year. By that time, you're in year 3, you've done a lot of work. So I would be letting down the whole group. And that's when the shift came. So my piece that I had to present on was about neuroscience. I found it incredibly difficult, incredibly complex. I was sure I was going to fail it because it was just too complicated. The people in the group also said, look, Madeleine, please help us because we find it really difficult. And, you know, if you could help us with this, if you could do a good presentation and we can understand it, then we have a chance of passing. So it was a lot of pressure. And I really, I worked very hard and I managed to simplify it. And I drew pictures and made it really easy to understand so that I could understand it. And then I could teach it. And when I had finished that presentation and I looked at everybody, I realized I was probably blushing. I don't know whether I was or not, but their faces were completely with me. And they were completely grateful afterwards, including the professor, for helping them understand. And I realized that I had forgotten myself. I didn't have that voice inside my head. The only voice inside my head was, how can I make this easy enough to help them? Because otherwise they're going to fail. So am I. And so those tables switched, because until then, whenever I was blushing or I was avoiding something, it was always about me. Oh, he's going to think I fancy him. Oh, he's going to think, or she's going to think I'm shy and embarrassed, or I'm, you know, it was always about what they're going to think of me, shame and so on. This time, I didn't think about myself at all. I was just thinking about them. And I realized that was for me, that was my door out of this. And it's really since that moment, and then I went into business. I worked in life sciences industry for many years, and it's that moment that stuck with me when I could feel the flush coming. Sometimes, I'm not going to say every time, but sometimes if I could switch it to concentrate on what they're saying, it's about them, you know, I could short circuit the process. And then I began to found, once I realized that, I began to found other ways to short circuit the process and began to be able to control that. Not every time, but a lot of the time. And so that really was empowering. And then I started experimenting with it. I realized I could control my body. And of course, I started reading up on it. My medical degree had helped me. I talked about that exposure in the TED talk. That helped a lot. So then I just read up and found ways to control it myself. I really did it by myself. I think because I don't think there was much help then. And there weren't people like you, April. There weren't communities to join or anything. There wasn't anything like that. Yeah.
And I find it interesting, the face trigger for you. I think that's for a lot of us. I talked to this, she's a friend who does like yoga therapies, and I went to go do a Thai yoga therapy with her one day, and I hadn't talked to many people at all, in my circle. Like I'd been talking to the internet world, but no one in my circle about this. No one even knew. They would say, oh, like, I mean, I've seen it before. I don't think anything about it. Those are my safe people, you know, but I was talking to her, and it's like this little girl comes out that is so, you know, I've got this confident persona in the corporate America, in my job with the people, leading the people. And then I get with this friend, and I'm like sitting on her floor, and I just weep. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? And she was so safe and so comforting. But she basically was like, as you were talking about, like with trauma, it doesn't have to be big traumas. It's a big trauma in your body. And she said, you may have a trigger that lies in the environment around you, whether that's a facial cue or the way somebody does something with their nose, whatever that is that triggered back in the day for you. Or it may be multiple things in the environment that you may never find. And I remember feeling this sense of like, well, that sucks, like the defeat of it, because what I find with people who deal or who are suffering with chronic blushing and flushing erythrophobia is they are constantly looking for a product, something to hide it even more, but we don't want to go inward. And so with her having this Thai yoga massage, part of that process was just feeling my body and just kind of connecting my head and my body back together. But I actually felt encouraged afterwards when she was telling me that basically this is like a scavenger hunt that you can go on and just experiment with things. And so instead of it being this thing that's controlling you, you can go and kind of play with it a little bit and try to figure out a little bit more about what may be triggering it. And so when you said you went from not thinking about yourself to just thinking about the group, I think about when I was younger in my teens and getting into my early 20s. And I was telling my husband this, I'm like, that girl would never have flushed. I mean, that girl was so outspoken. I mean, you talk about it in your TED Talk about people who speak in meetings that might need to not speak as much in the meetings. Like that was me. The one that's like chasing people down in the parking lot because I want to continue the conversation. And they're like no self-awareness whatsoever. But I was so liberated in that. And then when I was I started working in behavioral health, and I was working with a PhD psychologist, and I was in the HR function, but he was as well, but he had a PhD psychology background, and he helped talk me through some things at work. And all of a sudden I was in the by the water cooler, and I felt like I was so aware of myself all of a sudden, to where when people walked in the room, I would hold my breath. And then it's like the pendulum swung from one end to the other. And it was all about me all the time, about how loud I am, how much I'm talking, when I shouldn't talk, how I should, and all of these things I was doing for myself, which were helpful in bringing balance at some point, but it went too far the other direction. And I started to flush really badly. And I wanted people around me to like me. And I wanted, especially bosses, because I wanted to grow in my career. And that was attached to livelihood for me. And my husband and I really struggled financially when we first got married, and we lost our house. And so there was that fear that was happening there. And it attached to these authority figures that were attached to my money. And so that was a big thing for me, of speaking to them and then realizing, like in your TED Talk, you talk about, the answer, but you sit on it, and that there was research that shows that 50% of people won't say a word. And that over time, what I would start to do is to start holding back what I knew the answer was, or a creative thought, because they may disapprove of it. And my story had become, if I do speak up, there are repercussions. And I had gotten fired multiple times for being too vocal. And it was really immature too. So it's probably the way I was speaking up, but also the story that it told me was, if you speak up, if you are yourself, then you will have your livelihood detached at that moment. So that was a trauma for me. And when you talk about environment, which I'll get to that in a second, but you talk about environment, I kind of hit on this a while ago, that I work in an environment now for about a year. It's a remote company, my day job, doing human resources for a software development company. It is the safest environment I've ever been in. And I noticed that now I wear t-shirts there. The first few meetings that I had with my boss for like the first 6 months, we have one-on-ones every week. So nice. He's such a nice guy, very stone face at times, and trying to read his face. And I would just see on the camera, me just totally covered in redness and splotchiness. But now I notice we're in meetings together. I'm not even thinking about me. I'm just enjoying his company and talking with him. And it had to do with the environment, which we'll get there in a second. But you talk about speaking up and self-actualization. Can you talk a little bit more about self-actualization and the importance of it for people who suffer from erythrophobia?
Yes. So self-actualization is a term that was coined, years ago by Abraham Maslow, who we think of him. People learn about him in terms of, the hierarchy of needs, and he's one of the founders of modern psychology. And it's really that concept that you're living a life where you feel you have value and you're making a difference, and your life, you're really growing and you're developing, and your life is full, you're fulfilled. And when we hide ourselves, when we stay invisible because we're worried we're going to be judged, or because of shame, or we whatever the reasons are, but this is always to do with shame and guilt and worry of being judged, then we're preventing ourselves from actually being our best selves, being our true selves, for actually reaching our potential. We're staying stuck. And that's the job of our subconscious mind. Our subconscious mind job is to keep us exactly where we are, because that's safe. And so anytime there could be a threat, and the body doesn't know what the threat is, it just interprets physical sensations as a threat. Your heart starts beating just a little bit faster. You start breathing just a little bit more rapidly for whatever reason, or you notice a flick of the eyes of a male colleague that's looking, and you think, "Whoa, is that safe?" Your body thinks, "Hang on, there's a threat," and kicks in. Mm-hmm. And that's what stops us, because your subconscious mind thinks, "Whoop, danger." It doesn't know what the danger is. It can't evaluate the danger. So, okay, keep stuck, stay hidden, don't say anything. You'll be safe. That's the freeze response. Mm-hmm. So fight, flight, freeze, as you know. And so blushing is a freeze response. It's to keep us safe, because our bodies have picked up a trigger. Just like your friend said, she was absolutely right. It's picked up a trigger from the environment. And so it keeps you safe, which is great, but we don't need that kind of safety. If we keep staying quiet, then we're not talking, we're not saying what we think, we're not saying what we feel, we're not connecting with other people, we're staying in our own little world, and we're staying exactly where we are. And life is not about staying exactly where you are. Life's about living and finding out who you are. Mm-hmm. So unless we speak through that, unless we look at that blushing as a doorway of, okay, this is the door through which I have to walk in order to reach my potential. And if you do blush regularly, chances are very, very high that whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, that you're a highly sensitive person, that you notice and respond to things more deeply than the average population, and that you've probably got a great deal to give, but you're keeping yourself stuck. So the blushing, the way to cure blushing is to face it head on and deal with it head on. And yes, you're going to blush. And isn't it wonderful when you've got leaders, and that's why I talk about the environment so much in the TED Talk, isn't it wonderful when you've got leaders who hold that safe space for you when you're blushing? Yeah. So you can blush through it. And it's uncomfortable, but there's no, you're called the phoenix, there's no phoenix without the ashes. We have to go through the ashes before we can fly. So
you talk about, so one thing that I always say to people and to myself is freedom is in the mystery. Freedom is in the mystery. It's on the other side of what I fear most. And I heard in your TED Talk where you said the very thing you fear is the thing you create when you listen to the voice in your head. And it's like, I went through a season, I wrote a book called Pressing Forward. It's all about my journey with anxiety and depression, suicidal ideations. It was really just a terrible season. And while I was suffering with that, I started writing the book as if I was healed from it. And I just believed I was going to get on the other side, and reframed that whole situation into, I'm going to do something good with this, even though I was still physically and emotionally stuck, psychologically stuck in that moment. And one thing that I started to realize is that as I was documenting and people were wanting to learn more about my experiences, I wanted to sit with a panic attack and document it. And it would not happen anymore. Once I wanted it, once I was welcoming it, once I was excited about it so that I could actually like document, and haven't had a panic attack since. It was the running away from it that was making me have more and more panic attacks. It was a constant cycle of I'm fearing that I'm going to have it again. And therefore I'm having one again because I'm inviting it back.
It's only when you embrace it, when you accept it. Everybody, talk to any coach. The first step to being cured is acceptance of where you are. So it's only when you embrace it, recognize it's a signpost showing you where you need to go. That's how I see blushing, really. It's what, and I love the way you said that, become sort of like an observer or a scientific investigator in yourself. Oh, I'm blushing. What's that about? And even try to provoke it in a safe environment. Safety first, always safety first. Why always safety first? The reason is because your fight-flight response only kicks in when you don't feel safe. And so you have to start with that feeling of safety. You think of a little toddler. It will only start investigating the world and crawling off and looking at things if it knows that the caregiver is nearby. If the caregiver is nearby, it isn't there, it won't investigate. It's the same for you. So if you're safe, you will experiment, you'll try. If you feel safe, you'll experiment, you'll try. If you don't, if you feel threatened, you're not going to. So it's all about, so the subconscious mind is governed by our reptilian brain. So it's all about stroking the lizard, keeping it safe, and giving yourself whatever it is that you need to be safe. And you've done some wonderful things. You've written a book, you've investigated yourself, you've created this group. Every single person listening to this or watching this knows what they need to be safe. In my work, when I'm training leaders or whatever, it's about, okay, if I'm giving a presentation, what do I need to feel safe? Do I need to prepare a lot? Do I need to have my notes with me? What do I need to have a little talisman perhaps in my pocket? Whatever it happens to be, so that you're starting from a safe space and then you can begin to experiment. Safety first is one of the keys. That's the first one. And the second one is your blushing is showing you the way to your magnificence. And the only way to reach it is through. You can't go round, you can't go backwards, you have to go through it. It's the door you have to walk through.
I love that. And I love that reframing, because that's the journey that I've been on and that everybody has watched and been a part of with me, is me showing up with my first video just broken and just, this is me. I was fresh out of the shower. I have no makeup on, hair is not done. I'm in a t-shirt. I'm just like, this is me. And I can't keep living this way. And I got to start somewhere. And now I'm interviewing you and we're having a nice discussion and hearing that, it's the way to your magnificence. I just think that, and I've been there too, looking for products, looking for a cure, people are doing surgeries, and for some people that is a life or death situation. They have to get it done because people have committed suicide over this condition. And I think a lot of that is due to lack of awareness. I think it's due to lack of conversations like this, where there is hope and going through it. And it is something that, speaking of safe environments, I think for me, being in the corporate world for a very long time and different structures around that, it just was never safe. And I think what you were saying about how awesome it is that really good leaders will hold that safe space. And that's the thing that I noticed with the person who I report to now, is that those first 6 months, I would always flush and be super red and like uncomfortable and kind of like moving myself around, which actually brings more attention to you, but you're just so uncomfortable because your body is saying, flee, get away from here. It's not safe. That he never said a word about it, and going into this company also, they knew that I had an organization called Blushing Phoenix, and maybe asked a couple of questions about it, and nobody really cared or went into that. So it wasn't like this thing that I'm hiding either behind the scenes. They can definitely go watch and see things. But then it was all of a sudden, I don't even know when, that I realized I'm not flushing with him anymore. And it was because he had held that space, and my body was able to understand a new story, that this is actually a safe spot. Like you said, if it's not safe, we can try all the applications. I think it's still good to try, but that environment, it kind of makes or breaks.
And you found, I'm sure, that leader created that safe space for you. And as a result, you're so much more competent.
Mm-hmm.
You're so much more innovative. You contribute so much more. So in my leadership training, holding that safe space for people is critical. And I really think it changes the world. Whether you hold the safe space for yourself or you hold the safe space for others, that's the key. And I talk about the 3 E's. It's the key to your own fulfillment and making a difference in the world, whether you're a leader, whether you're an employee, whether you're a teacher, a parent, a 14-year-old, adolescent that's just dealing with flushing. These things are so critical, but the flushing is the doorway to your magnificence. And there's no way you have to walk through, but it has to be in a safe space. And if you're not in a safe space, then it's all about changing the environment so that you are.
Did you ever have situations on your journey where people pointed it out? Yeah. And how did you, a lot of people ask questions around, and we all kind of handle it differently. I've heard some people say like, it's a private matter and they don't want to talk about it. So they just kind of move through it really quickly. I will usually give a whole educational seminar on it. What was your response to that?
Well, it's changed with time. So I have the fortune or misfortune to be the age I am. So to begin with, I would avoid, like I said. Then I started using humor. All sorts of things about, you could fry an egg on my cheek or whatever. I'd started using humor and then I just started, actually, once I became more aware of what it is, and once I started talking about it more, and I realized it may not be flushing that people struggle with, but it might be shaking, or it might be feeling sick. So many people actually have things they're hiding. So once I did start talking about my blushing, I would say, look, I'm going to go bright red. It's just something I do. Don't worry about it. I really want to have this conversation. Just don't worry about my flushing. And I'd do it that way, or I'd bring a big fan and go like this. And I've had to take back some of those tools that I could leave behind. Now that I'm going through menopause and post-menopause, I'm having to use them again, because it's like you were describing. Suddenly you're going to get a flush. No warning, no threat. It's just, here it comes.
Right.
It's associated with sweating and so on. So my way is I prefer to be the one to bring it into the conversation. Then I feel like I'm controlling it. When there's somebody else who's sniggering or laughing or looking at me strangely, I feel like I lose control then. Mm-hmm. And that control helps me be in my safe space. So it helps me then navigate it and be able to navigate the situation better.
Yeah, it's a similar approach for me. Is something that the more I've given a voice to it as well, I know they're going to look, I'm going to watch, especially since mine is chest, neck, their eyes are going to go straight to my neck. I don't have a big chest, so I know they're not looking there. They're just looking at the redness. They're looking at the redness. And that is, I think, like you said, having that control going into the conversation. I have noticed, we were talking about the safe space again with environment and exposure, that, like I said, if you were a fly on the wall listening in, you would never know that I was struggling to speak and share ideas and say things in meetings, because I'm very vocal in there. But there's so many times that I have, I'm not going to say that, or no, that doesn't fit what they're saying, or I hold it for so long that they move on. And then I feel like I've betrayed myself by not. Yeah. So it's like a catch-22, like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And so you had said in your TED talk about, for people who work in virtual settings too, maybe that's putting something in the chat box. Maybe that's turning your camera on, as you talked about exposure. And that's that's something that I've been practicing. So I had already moved through a lot of like the erythrophobia. And I think getting that out of the way, that massive fear of turning red and what that's going to do and how that's going to limit my abilities for the future, and it just stopped believing that lie, because I was rewriting the story through exposures. But also now I'm in this place where I'm starting to realize beyond the redness to me is a manifestation of the words I'm not saying. And I had a friend who was talking about some things with somatics, and she said, where does your flushing happen? And I said, it's right here, around, like along where the vagus nerve is. There's like all in my throat area. And we started talking about, chakras and balancing the body. And she said, this is your throat chakra, right? This is your voice. And she said, I'm curious to see what would happen if you just started talking. Like when it comes to mind and you get that impulse to say it. And that was terrifying, because I have taught myself as an impulsive person in the past that would run all the meetings, take up all the space, that it still was a form of be my friend, like me, let's, this is who I am. But I just wasn't thinking about it. But then once I started thinking about it, it became overly thinking about everything that I'm going to say, to the point of silencing myself. It's like it started to happen little by little over time, to where I got to where I am now. Well, really about a year ago, of this small, depressed, sad person that feels like they have no direction in life. And I'm like, what happened to me? So anyway, over the past month, I have been, when I have an idea, I speak it. And it was after I heard your TED talk is when I really started to practice that more, like you said, kind of that like investigator of your life. And especially in work, because work is a trigger for me, even though my boss creates a safe space, I'm on the leadership team. And so all those leaders are there, all those eyes are there, those, your top people. And a little bit of the imposter syndrome kicks in. And I am like, you know what? I have a note over here on my light that says, you are not insecure. And there's another one that says, take up space. And it is that I have ideas and I can contribute to the conversation. So this past week, or it was 2 weeks ago, I threw out an idea, and it really was not a great idea, but it was something that I thought. And as it landed, I realized that it was safe where it landed. So then I had another idea and threw that idea out, and it was a little more tracking where we were heading as a team. And then I just kind of sat back and listened to their ideas and was listening to them talk, not thinking about myself. And out of nowhere, this idea popped up, and they were talking, and I was like, oh, I don't want to interrupt them. So I threw it in the chat really quick. And there's so many times that I would have things sitting in the chat and then delete, like, never mind. It's too late. I'm not going to put that. And I just sent it. And then I sat there waiting for them to stop, and somebody read it out loud and said, April, elaborate on that. What do you mean by that? And then I shared, and they love the idea. Then they took my piece of the idea and expanded it. So it was everybody's idea. So I got to see, from what you talked about in your TED talk about the exposure and throwing your voice out there. That first one, and I have a journal, and I was journaling the whole time. I feel really stupid. This is how I feel, even though I put their faces didn't show approval when I said it, but I'm glad I said it. And then I would throw another idea, and then I would journal, because they can't see me, I'm journaling what I'm feeling as I'm saying the things, and becoming very aware of, they didn't give me approval with their face. So that is shutting me down. But instead of shutting down, I'm going to go forward again, because I'm going against this thing. And
so there's some things I just have to throw in there, April. So the first one is on your little post-it note that you've got on your screen. I am not secure. Get rid of that and say, I'm secure.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, it says you are not insecure, but I need to say, I am not.
No.
I am.
There's no negative. I am insecure, because your brain, when you read I am not insecure, your brain reads it, I am insecure. Oh. Because you've got insecure. So you want to say, I am secure. I am secure. I am safe. I have a voice. Always in the positive, because your brain will believe what it reads. And if it reads or hears insecure, it believes insecure. It can't evaluate.
Change it.
I just have to say that.
Thank you. No, I love that. Thank you.
And then the other thing, and I think that a lot of us who blush a lot, there's that hypersensitivity. And I'm not talking about the hyper-responsive sympathetic nervous system here, which is also HSP. I'm talking about being a hypersensitive person. And from what you're saying, that processing, they are not showing approval. You're doing deep processing. And I'm also a HSP hypersensitive person. And I think, I mean, I haven't done the research, I'm not a researcher, but I bet there's research out there that would link HSP hypersensitive people and people who blush profusely. I think there's a lot of connections there because we evaluate things so much more deeply. That's number one. And number two, we feel traumas so much more acutely because we feel and process just more deeply than the average population. There's about 20 to 30% of HSPs in a population. And because we feel traumas so much more acutely and our body wants to learn, that imprints. And so something that might be a relatively minor trauma imprints very quickly and creates that trigger response that we remember, the brain remembers because it wants to protect us and keep us safe. Mm-hmm. So part of the cure is being so grateful for being, to having that protective mechanism because it does keep us safe. Being so grateful for being somebody who is sensitive and does notice these nuances, that enjoys having these deep conversations, that, does just processing because, okay, there's flip side of the coin. If you process, if you're a hypersensitive person, you're going to have the highs are going to be higher and the lows are going to be lower. And you talked about suicidal fantasies and so on. But there's so much work now on HSP that I think that's an area for you to perhaps look at, or maybe your listeners are already familiar with it. There's so much there and so much help now that I think that there's a definite opportunity there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to people as we're talking about safe work environments that don't feel safe in their environments, and they do work with leaders that don't encourage diversity of thought? For a lot of people, myself included, I feel like if this was 2 years ago, I would say, well, I can't just leave my job, or maybe it's me. Yeah. What advice would you give, or not necessarily, what would you say to them in that, and they're not necessarily in an environment where they feel safe, but they also don't feel they can leave that environment?
Absolutely. And that's so many of us, isn't it? I mean, I was in that situation for many years. And unfortunately, it's very often that you get not very helpful bosses that do rise up. They get the results and they're not necessarily the best people managers. So unfortunately, there's far too many of them around. That's why I do what I do to try and make a drop of solving that problem in my leadership trainings. But the advice I would give is that most of the time, not always, sometimes you're one-to-one with the person, but most of the time there are other people. And whenever you're a minority, it doesn't matter what minority you are, whenever you're a minority, feeling alone makes you unsafe, and therefore you're hypervigilant. You were talking about being worried you're going to lose your job and so on. So you're already hypervigilant. So you've got a higher threshold. Mm-hmm. So when you can feel safe, and the way to feel safe is to connect with others. And so somebody in your team or somebody in the meeting room, even if it's just like an eye contact or trying to connect with them at some way, ideally you would be friends with them and you would connect with them outside the meeting or outside the situation. But having that group. So if you can do it with real people, then do it. If you can't do it with real people, because it's not always possible, you can create your posse in your head. So you've got this wonderful group. Everybody on this group, I'm sure, is rooting for everybody else. Mm-hmm. You've always got each other, no matter where you are at work. And you know that you've got each other's back. And you can bring that in our brains now. Now I talked about the reptilian brain. Now I'm talking about the neocortex, which is the most advanced part of our brain. We're able to conceptualize and imagine, and we can create that safe group, because you know you're not alone. Now, it takes a bit of practice, and there are things to do to practice that. But that's one thing that I would really recommend, is connecting with others, whether it really, which is ideal, or just in your mind. You bring them in your mind. I talk about that voice inside your head. You can bring all your team inside. You've got a massive imagination. You can create whatever you want. I used to be, for example, I used to decide I was a horse, so that I could, if I wanted, people could ride on my back and I could take them for a ride. If I didn't like that, I could kick them off, I could rear up. So I used all sorts of imagery to help. It's just a tool to give me power, to give me control. And that imagery is very, very powerful. We can use it. Our brains are amazing machines that we can use to help ourselves.
Oh, I love that. What would you say to someone, as we're getting close to wrapping this up? I usually end these with asking whoever I'm interviewing to say, somebody's watching this, they've landed here, they are at the end of the end, and they hear you talking to them. What do you want to say to them?
So what I would say is that your blushing shows what an incredibly sensitive, caring, and amazing person you are. It shows that you are unique and have a lot to give. And the world needs that gift. It's a shame not to give the world that gift. And that gift comes through your voice. But like I said in my TED talk, before your voice even comes up, there are little things to do first. So even if speaking's too much, it doesn't have to start with speaking. It can start with, I've got a client at the moment, when she goes to a networking event, her first step was not to sit at the back, just to sit a little bit further forward. And that's all. She didn't have to talk to anybody. So it takes just small things to, inside your comfort zone, to move yourself forward. Always start inside your comfort zone. We need safety for our little reptile. Stroke it. And your blushing is the doorway to your magnificence, and ultimately your voice.
Thank you so much. Madeleine, will you tell us a little bit more about your professional work and your leadership training, and just kind of a rundown of what it is that you do to help organizations and leaders in your career?
Yes, so Business for Good is the name of our company. So it's a conscious leadership consultancy. And what we do is we train and coach not just established leaders, but future leaders, emerging leaders, established leaders, to really bring their best selves to the job, to help their teams bring their best selves to the job, because we believe that business can be a force for good. And the only way to make a positive impact in the world is through self-actualization. So it's all about whole person growth. So we give leaders the skills to lead themselves, to lead their teams. And those skills are also always supplemented with coaching, training, accompaniment, so that we get that whole person coming to the office, and not somebody who's just bringing part of themselves to the office or to the group, whether we're online or, because I think so many people have a mask on at work. That's not them. But that mask isn't the way to change the world. It's the way to change the world is your true self, because you were given the gifts that you were born with, and your purpose on the planet is to actually share those gifts with the world. And so that's what we do.
Thank you so much. Every time I get to do these interviews, I get this front row seat, and I just soak it all in. And it has been such an honor and just such a gift to hear from you directly. I know that this is going to be so impactful. You've left me so much just to sit with and marinate with. And the greatest part is when I get to edit the video and kind of give more highlight to when you're speaking, I get to hear it all again without actually looking at my questions and trying to be conscious of time. I actually just get to really take it all in. So that's knowing what everybody's going to get to experience. And your TED Talk was just so beautifully spoken. And I think you did such a great job at being so tender about people who blush, and just coming forward and letting it be known that you were that person, and sharing your story. And then also what you're doing in the professional realm with leaders and future leaders. All of that connects really deeply with me because I do, I'm a creative. I write, I have the channel here, but I also do work a day job in human resources and culture and talent development. And so seeing all of that kind of come full circle in you, this is like everything that I do in my life. And the timing of your TED Talk, I think you did it maybe in June or July, was it? I think the summer.
Yes, it was delayed, and I think you contacted. There was videography problems, and I think it came out and you saw it. But you know, the older I get, the more I think there are no coincidences in life. Things happen when they need to happen with the people they need to happen. So I'm honored that you reached out to me, April, and I think it's fabulous what you're doing and hugely important. And you're an example of what that brilliance, you know, you're unlocking your magnificence through the door of your blushing. And everybody watching has got their own magnificence, and they know where the door is. And it takes the time it takes. Don't be impatient. It takes the time it takes. So really wonderful to be here. And I'm delighted to have got to know you a little bit.
I did want to let you know to be sure to check out the details in the description box below. Number one, in regards to Madeleine's TED Talk, because you have to go watch it. But number two, I wanted to let you know that we are officially on Patreon. So be sure to check that out at the link below. Check out some of the cool perks that you could receive by becoming a official patron of the channel. As always, thank you for your support, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Please leave in the comments below what was your favorite part, what really spoke to you. Be sure to check out her TED Talk, and be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, if it was helpful. And as always, subscribe if you have not yet. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being part of this journey. I think we're all walking through that door and entering into our magnificence. I'll see you in my next video.